and let's say that they need to keep the beachhead, keep the place that they can use again in the future to destabilize Russia in whatever way that they can. Well, Zelensky does have a substantial role. The only problem is that Zelensky doesn't have sovereignty in Ukraine. He's a puppet, and he's a puppet of external forces. And I think that the most essential aspect of this war obviously is economic. It's not, I don't know if there's anybody left that still believes that this has anything to do with freedom and democracy. This is clearly about resources, Ukraine's resources, but more so Russia's resources, and using the hegemony over Central and Eastern Europe to defend the hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. That has been the game of the empire for the last 2 centuries. And the United States has been a major part of this. And there are many vested interests in the United States that are still committed to this, that would still want to see Zelensky's regime succeed, retain power, defeat Russia, and they don't defeat Russia and Ukraine, force them to withdraw. Because let's say French and British troops land in Odessa. I guarantee you there will be many people in Odessa who will provide the exact location of where these troops are to the Russians, who will visit with Mr. Kinjal or something like that. So it's going to be a political struggle for control of Ukraine. But if the Russians succeed to get the Americans on their side, then I think they no longer need to do it. Well, if you're sitting on the other side of that, then the one thing you don't want to give the Israelis is external enemy that would cause them to close rank behind Netanyahu's government. Because once there's an external enemy, an external threat, then all these internal infighting dies down, because you have to go and defend the nation. So I think that maybe that's part of the reason why so many forces in the region are standing back. Iran still never replied for Israel's last attack, because maybe they judged that it's better to let Israel just fall under the weight of its own internal problems. As far as the mainstream media in the West is concerned, Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It's a guarantor of stability in the Middle East. It has the right to defend itself, and that's about it. That's about all they say. In Israel itself, I think the debate is a lot more lively, but it's also becoming. I think that the reason that this, and so if I were Israeli, if I were a Zionist, I would be very, very distrustful of the Trump administration, regardless of what is being said out in the open. Now, I think that there are these for the region, for the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia. I think they all see the writing on the wall. They all see that the situation is unsustainable. They all see that if they yield to Israel and to the Western Empire, that they'll be next. This is no security architecture. This is a permanent insecurity architecture. And up until 10 years ago, I don't know. On my clock, it's 2015 when Russia intervened on the side of Syria in the Middle East. that things begin to change, and the powers in the region realize that there is an alternative. We're going to impose sanctions. We're going to freeze your assets, and then that's it. And so they realize that they need something else, that they need to protect themselves by making nice with Iran, with China, with Russia, and so start to distance themselves away from the Western Empire. But the same is going on in the United States. And I think that the tide is really turning. And this is why we see now that the main arsonist of peace in the world, which is the United Kingdom, is starting to destabilize more and more and more regions. I got a report from Bosnia that the president of the Serbian enclave, Serbian canton, Milorad Dodik, is going around with very heavy security, and he's saying publicly that the British are trying to assassinate him, specifically the British. And in pretty much everybody in Bosnia accepts that the British are ruling the land and that the place is crawling with British. And Putin has said, we very much welcome other nations to join us in developing this and exploiting these resources. So explicitly, the United States is welcome. And so that's, 10, 12 trillion worth of Ukraine's resources, plus 75 to 90 trillion of Russian resources. And then, the United States also doesn't have to shoulder the cost of providing security for all this. And so it's an offer with much greater upside for the United States and virtually no downside. Whereas being the security guarantor for Zelensky's government has a massive downside risk, meaning, the United States would have to provide the troops and the weaponry and the treasure to upkeep the Ukraine's government, at risk of ending up in a war against Russia in the part of the world where Russia has the escalatory dominance. Even this was clear even to Barack Obama in 2014, which is why he declined to escalate the conflict back then. And so from that point of view, the choice for the United States is crystal clear, but it's not something that you can just lay out publicly and say, this is why we're doing it. It all has to be wrapped in human rights, humanitarian issues, peace, law and order, international, all those nice things. And so I think that the Trump administration is very carefully maneuvering their way out, while at the same time discussing cooperation with Russia on future things, on future projects, on economic development, on trade. And they, they give it away because they say, we're discussing bigger issues than just Ukraine. That there will have to be a period of maybe a national unity government, and then, the new elections. The Russians will exert pressure to bring all of the, war criminals to justice. So there will be a continuing purge of the neo-Nazi element from Ukraine. And I think that in this way, without having to fight a war, Russia will be able to reassert itself and draw Ukraine back into its orbit and have a government in Kiev that will realign with Russia and loosen its ties to the West. And so in that sense, Russia gains control over all of Ukraine again. Well, Giorgia Meloni is very close to the Trump administration. She's very close with the certain U.S. interests which seem to be opposed to Europe, to the European Union and to Britain. This is all, happening under the radar. It's not overt. It's not out in the open, but it's very, very real. And I think that we will know. It'll take time for the dust to settle and for things to become more apparent. Right now, it's very, very difficult to judge. Again, part of the reason is that, there's a lot of entrenched thinking. People on both sides of the Atlantic have grown up with the ideas of these traditional alliances between the United States and European powers, the special relationship between the Britain and the United States and all this. But I think that in actual fact, the relations are borderline hostile now. And if you read British press, every so often you will see hints dropped that the United States is now the enemy. And then, not the Europeans in the sense of European nations, but the European Union is very afraid of Trump, and they are on the Western powers. It's always coming from London, unless it's coming through its satellite, Brussels. They have pushed Croatia into an alliance, into a military alliance with Albania, Kosovo, and Bulgaria. And I'm not sure if Bulgaria is really a part of it. People are saying, no. They're denying it, even though it's been officially announced. This is the east, the south, and the west of Serbia. This is obviously aimed at Serbia. But there is zero appetite for this kind of a conflict in Bulgaria, and there's zero appetite for this kind of a conflict from Croatia. So we're talking basically about Kosovo and Albania. And I suspect that Albania is not too much on board with that either, because Kosovo is a NATO-controlled enclave, a U.S.-controlled enclave. But again, the United States is rapidly losing interest. It used to be, it still is a training ground for jihadis that then get fielded around to Syria and elsewhere. To wage war on behalf of the empire. And now there's fear that the Serbs will retake Kosovo, and that the Kosovo will have to defend itself by force of arms at some point. And then at the same time, the Serbs have refused to sanction Russia. They have good open cooperation with Russia, and so attacking Serbia would be, again, like in World War I, a way to draw Russia into another quagmire, this time in the Balkans. And in World War I, they used Serbia to provoke Austrian Empire into attacking Serbia, waging war, and then it all blew up because Russia had to come to the aid of Serbs. They didn't come to Serbia, but they kind of declared war on Germany, because Germany was deemed as responsible for the behavior of Vienna. And so now it seems to me that the Brits are trying to revamp the same playbook to draw Russia into the Balkans, to defend Kosovo as their beachhead in the Balkans, and to prevent Serbia from taking it over. But I don't know that it's going to work, because Serbia, Croatia, even though we were at war against the Serbs 30 years ago, we actually have a lot of reasons to have a positive, constructive cooperation with Serbia. We were part of the same country once. We had our disagreements, but we speak the same language. We're Christian nations on both sides. On the other hand, Croatians have very little in common with Kosovo or with Albania. We are completely different peoples. We don't speak the same language. They're Muslims, we're Catholic. Dragging us into this alliance is something that's almost against nature. Not to mention that it's territorially not even contiguous. These are territorial fragments that are not even connected. So it's the whole plan, I think, is completely idiotic. 100 years ago, Hungary was a major European power. Croatia is not a major European power. It's like the whole thing, it's the same geography, but the circumstances circumstances have changed so much that I think that it just reflects the desperation of the empire to do another arson attack against peace in the world. But I don't see it as gaining very much traction. In Croatia, in fact, people are kind of thinking like, what is this? What kind of an alliance is this? What does this have to do with us? And it's almost like it drifted into oblivion because people just kind of dismissed it, like, whatever, this is nothing, never mind. And so I think that nothing comes of it. I think that the Balkans is going to be very difficult to set alight again. It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. I think that people are seeing through the British role in Bosnia and against Serbia, and I think that they're not inclined to play into it. It's always the same playbook, Nima. It's the same playbook, and now Pakistan against India again, and it's just like one thing after another. This has been the 200-year architecture of insecurity in the world, deliberately set up, deliberately fomented by the British Empire and its reincarnation with the U.S. NATO empire. But it now faces real opposition in this world. And I think that real opposition is not only in command of the bulk of global GDP, it's also a credible economic, military, and diplomatic power in this world. And I think that more and more nations are realizing the sun is starting to rise from the east. They make sure that there is no effective communication between the two sides. Like now, they're desperate to break the new new entente cordiale between Russia and the United States. They want to keep them on hostile terms. So the same was done between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and now there's no need. There's no more need for that, and there's a lot to gain from constructive cooperation. And now everybody sees that. And then Russia signed a comprehensive cooperation agreement with Iran. China signed a comprehensive cooperation agreement with Iran. They're holding annual naval exercises every year in the Indian Ocean. They intended to draw them in order to behead them. But it's true that the United States has lost a lot of industry at the expense of China, and now they want to reverse this. They want to rebalance this and bring back manufacturing to the United States. But this will have to be sorted out between the United States and China in bilateral trade talks, and they will have to be signing comprehensive bilateral cooperation agreements, as the Chinese did with the Russians, as they did with the Iranians. And there's a lot of complementarity between the Chinese economy and the American economy. The American economy still has a certain dynamism that will allow it to spring back. When you start to allocate credit not into housing bubbles and real estate bubbles and spending trillions on the military industrial complex and bases and keeping upkeeping the NATO and so forth, the United States will be able to allocate a lot of capital into its main industries. I think that the Christmas list obviously includes ejecting Russia from the Black Sea altogether, from Crimea. And now this is all very much in jeopardy. But because there are powerful vested interests in the United States that are still committed to this project, the Trump administration cannot openly say, we actually think we get a much better deal by aligning ourselves with Russia, and so we're going to drop this Ukraine project altogether and walk away. So they have to kind of wrap it in something that is acceptable to the U.S. public. It has to be. They can't talk about the economic aspect. They can't talk about the scramble for for resources. So they have to talk about peace and humanitarian aspects and so forth. But, there's clearly now a fault line emerging between the US interests and the European interests. And, Zelensky has signed over in January the bulk of, I think it's predominantly United Kingdom and France. And I think that Germany is kind of teetering because the popular pressures are pushing the country away from Project Ukraine, while the CDU, CSU, the Greens, these increasingly unpopular political factions are still committed to the Project Ukraine. But if you look at who they are, they are all somehow alumni of the European banking, of the Western banking interests. Friedrich Merz is a former BlackRock guy, and I think that this is the project of European banking oligarchies. This is not the project of European people. But the problem is that the European banking oligarchies have they're very powerful, because by controlling the flow of credit and money and being able to sanction certain countries and exert pressure on certain politicians, even up to assassinations, they control the political process, even though most of the public is opposed. And so there's no let up, there's no compromise, which means that the situation is getting increasingly polarized to the point where many people, I think, who understand what's going on, think that there's a real chance that we will have civil wars in Britain, in France, and in Germany. And another Israeli politician said that Netanyahu should be removed from office by force. Many people may have thought so, but now it's being said out in the open explicitly. So it's telling you that the situation is untenable. And I think that the stage of decay now is such that it may be irreversible. And I think that in its current form, Israel can no longer survive. It'll have to change. And I don't know how it's going to change, but I think that, Henry Kissinger's prophecy from 2012, when he said that in 10 years, Israel will no longer exist, is maybe now coming to pass. It's been more than 10 years, but it's happening. What's going to happen after that? We don't know. The two-state solution has been killed by Netanyahu largely. And so what's the alternative? A one-state solution. So it will have to be some kind of a state not based on theocratic racial supremacy of one people that get to oppress the rest, but it'll have to be a nation where all three constituent peoples will have equal rights, some form of democracy where Jews and Christians and the Muslim will have equal status. And I hope that something like that will happen, and that the region will then finally know peace, because Israel has been the empire's attack dog in the region. It has kept the region destabilized for 77 years. And maybe this now comes to an end. And then there were several very important moments that I think probably shook the regimes in the region out of their slumber. One of them was August 15, 2021, the United States withdraws from Afghanistan. I think this was a very significant moment because it showed to everybody that the empire can no longer defend its puppets. Because we saw Afghanistan's president hastily board a helicopter with bags full of cash to escape with his life, and also the governor of the central bank trying to run to Turkmenistan, to Tajik, I don't know where, and then he ended up, he was rejected, and then he had to fly to Dubai, where they kind of let him stay reluctantly. But what it showed to these regimes, and then we had this terror attack in Pakistan, which could precipitate a wider conflict between India and Pakistan again. And so, I think that the Western Empire is in a dying agony, and it's going to try to set the world on fire to preserve itself. But at the same time, I think that the powers that are opposed to them understand what's going on. They're no longer falling into provocations, and I think it's getting much harder for them to do what they've been doing for the last 200 years. But what he said there is exactly correct. That is probably the most perfect statement Marco Rubio has ever said in his life. This is exactly what happened. I think that the history of the rise of China goes back to 1971, when Richard Nixon severed the convertibility of the dollar to gold. And I think that from that point on, the ruling establishment in the West knew that they were going to destroy the dollar and the United States, that they were going to completely